Hello, and welcome back to Fusion Friday. If you haven't met me, I'm Ash, and if you have, good to see you again. Last week was Stephen and Padparadscha, so this week someone had to fuse with Padparadscha. There was a vote between Ruby, Jasper, and Spinel, and I'm sure if you've read the title, you know who won. For this fusion, I immediately had this idea of a two-faced or two-headed gem, vaguely inspired by a comedy and tragedy mask. Spinel is a character who is quite stuck in the past, and while she did have that whole arc to learn to be better, I think combined with Padparadscha's present slash past vision, she really enhances who a character used to be. So last week, when I combined her with Steven, they made a character more akin to who Steven was in season one. So I wanted to keep with this idea and make a fusion that is very unstable because she cannot get over the past. Upset with Pink, but also just upset with the diamonds because of how they made both Padparadscha and Spinel suffer. She visually looks a lot more like Spinel, but I think she is the more overwhelming personality between the two, so let's pretend I did that on purpose. But one thing I really like visually is how I changed the pigtails. I made them low and shorter to be more of a combination of the two. Trust that they are pigtails, you just can't see the other one. The face was by far my favorite thing to come up with. She's stable enough to not unfuse, but her face is just not quite together. For her gem, I chose pink scalapolite, which if my research is accurate, is like apparently a new gem only recently discovered or something. So that's a cool fact. Because of this, there's no like lore or mythology behind this gem choosing, but there is, like healing properties associated with it as is the fact with like every gem. But this one is meant to represent healing and forgiveness. It brings balance and calming energies. And as a neat little detail, it is associated to be a heart chakra cleanser. And obviously, this gem has a heart gem. So now take all of that goodness, that positive vibes, and throw it away. Throw it away. Turn that smile around and frown. Girl is the absolute opposite of that. She's stuck in the past, definitely not healing, and definitely not forgiving. She is not calm. She's screaming, crying, and throwing up at all times. I think with all their unstableness, they are very evocative of when Malachite fuses for the first time. I don't think they would potentially even get, like, if they were in the show, a separate voice actor. I think it would just be Spinel and Padparadscha over the top of each other, and the two faces will actively talk to each other, but they are not supposed to be Spinel and Padparadscha. They are very much Scapolite, and she just kind of fights with herself, if that makes sense. As I mentioned, this face thing is inspired by like the tragedy and comedy mask, but I took a different spin on that. Obviously, she has like the tragedy, sadness, where crying face, but the comedy mask instead is like anger and frustration, kind of showing the two sides of grief and trauma being sadness and anger. And so I have the hands representing that with the sad face holding her face, and then the anger is like pulling her hair out. And then the other two arms are like kind of in like a almost like I'm stomping and like putting my hands down kind of vibe. Just to all like really represent all of that mixture of emotions and how she is feeling. You cannot see it explicitly in this illustration, but when I was drawing those arms, it was very clear to me that they kind of came from where Padparadscha's back bow is. And so that's like where they come out of. So they're coming out of her back. Power wise, I think it would be like really cool visually instead of Spinel's whole like old timey rubber hose effect that she has. because they are like so like unstable. She, instead of like stretching like that, like kind of oozes like her face is, and so when she stretches it looks more like that, more like a smear frame, I guess, than the rubber hosing effect that Spinel has. And most certainly doesn't have future vision just because Padparadscha doesn't have it. But I still think all Sapphire fusions should probably play into that future vision, or in Padparadscha's case, past slash present vision. And instead, much like how last week Stephen and Padparadscha could look into people's pasts, she also, Pink Scapolite, can see into the past, but more specifically can see into like your traumas very specifically, and like can only see every bad thing that has happened to you, and like brings that to the forefront of any opponent's mind. I think she probably like screams or does a similar like blowing horn thing that Spinel does in the film to like specifically just mass flashback everyone. She's just PTSD trigger. She will trigger all of everything that bad that has ever happened to you. I'm really happy I got to do Spinel with Padparadscha because this design just came to me so quickly as soon as I even rolled Spinel for this week. So it was just super, super exciting to do. And it really just got the creative juices flowing. The piece came out so smoothly. I even did a couple of sketches in my sketchbook at D&D, and it was just such an inspiring thing that came to me. I think unstable fusions are so creative and there's so much room to play with because their bodies are made of light, so you can really do anything with that. I am actively rewatching Steven Universe, so as of recording this, I actually finished the show and just watched the movie, so both of these characters are really fresh in my mind, which is super fun as well. And I so hope they do Lars of the Stars. I think Padparadscha is such an unutilized character, and I would love to see more of her. And I think Spinel in the film is absolutely amazing. I made a post when that movie came out on my Instagram a very long time ago, just bitching about how I didn't think it felt like a Steven Universe, but I was wrong and a child. And the movie is so good. The animation is gorgeous. I think the story is actually really heartwarming, especially as like a, at the time, farewell to Steven Universe. I don't think Future had been announced or maybe even confirmed at that point, so it was just such a beautiful film to cement how far these characters had come. And I think Spinel was a really good villain for it. I do think that because Spinel was the villain of this film, though, it really cemented this idea that people had post season 5 of Rose Quartz being an awful woman, an evil woman, when she was just a very flawed and complex character, who I know we throw around the term in the fandom very often about how character development being in reverse, but like it really was. And so I think having Spinel be a villain for this film really tarnished Rose's reputation. And that's not to say Spinel wasn't a victim of what Rose did to her. Obviously she was, but it's a cartoon and these characters are far more complex than just Rose was evil, Spinel was a victim. Spinel might have been a victim because she was a damn bitch in that film. She had no reason to be killing Steven. In fact, throughout the entire film, she was very much able to acknowledge that he was Steven. She never really called him Pink Diamond or had any grief with him being in this form. She just was like, Rose isn't here anymore, so I'm taking my anger out on you. And honestly, girl boss, she deserved it. Super excited to see how Steven Universe Future holds up. I haven't seen it in a while, but I have rewatched it more than I've watched the show. And even at the time, I was one of few people online who absolutely loved Future. Super excited for that. I stopped talking about Pink Scapolite a while ago, but I said basically all I wanted to say. I wish I had more to say about Padparadscha, but she's just not prevalent in the show enough. And I hope my ramblings weren't too um unfollowable. But that about wraps up all I have to say. I hope you enjoyed. If you're unfamiliar with my Fusion Fridays, you probably are. This is only my second one. I have a big spreadsheet with basically every character from the show, and I'm rolling 3 numbers according to my spreadsheet and letting everybody vote in the description from those 3 characters, just so it's a little bit more manageable and less overwhelming. So if you'd like to vote to see who Spinel is going to fuse with next time, I've already rolled my numbers and I have some really interesting characters. Starting off, we have Blue Pearl, which I think would be super cute. And then we've got Pink Pearl / Volleyball, which would also be super cute. And then the drama, Overrolled Pink Diamond. Very excited to see the outcome of that. We have 2 pearls to choose from and a diamond. So please vote and subscribe so you don't miss my next one.